The house looked smaller than he remembered. Time had sunk it deeper into the earth, like it too had been trying to disappear. Isaiah James stood on the warped front porch of his grandfather's old home, staring out at the backyard choked with weeds, vines, and rusted memories. The town of Fairhill hadn't changed much in 20 years. White picket fences, quiet stairs, polite silences. But Isaiah had. He came back alone 2 months after the funeral. No one from the neighborhood had come to the service. Not one casserole, not one knock. His grandfather had lived in this house for 52 years. He died in it too. And not a soul had said goodbye. Isaiah dropped his duffel bag in the front hallway, its hinges still creaking like they held a grudge. The house smelled of dust and wood rot and something older like smoke that never fully left the walls. He had no plans beyond cleaning up, maybe selling it. But today, he just wanted to clear the backyard, make it look like someone cared. He grabbed a shovel and stepped into the tall grass. The soil squelched beneath his boots as he hacked at overgrown roots and thorny bramble. The summer air was thick, cicadas screaming in the distance. Sweat slicked his brow, stung his eyes. He worked without thinking until the third shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. Thunk, he paused. He struck again. Thunk, again and again. He knelt, heart suddenly knocking in his chest. The grass bent low around him like it too was holding its breath. He brushed away the dirt with gloved hands until his fingertips scraped against something hard. Wood, old, gray, and splintered, barely more than a plank. But not natural. Too flat, too straight. He kept digging, slower now. His breath grew shallow, the air heavier. Metallic temps crept into his mouth like blood. He hit the edge of it, then another. 4 corners. A box. Buried deep beneath ivy and thyme. Isaiah froze. A memory rose like smoke from some deep, sealed room in his mind. His grandfather, sitting silent on the porch with a cigarette between yellowed fingers, once muttering under his breath, "Some things best left in the ground, son." Isaiah stared at the object. The dirt clung to it like skin. It didn't open. It didn't even touch it again. He just sat back on his heels, staring. The trees at the edge of the yard stood too still. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. It wasn't just what he found, it was what he felt. It's the hum of something old and wrong and waiting. His mind spun with questions, but none he wanted answered. Not yet. He stood slowly, backing away. The shovel beside the half-uncovered wood and wiped his hands on his jeans. His pulse wouldn't slow. It was just a box, just rotted lumber in the dirt, but it wasn't. He didn't call the sheriff. He didn't knock on a neighbor's door. He went back inside the house and locked the door behind him, like it could hold back whatever he had stirred awake. He poured a glass of water with shaking hands and sat in the same kitchen chair his grandfather used to claim. The silence inside felt no safer than the quiet outside. He stared out the window toward the spot. The dirt had shifted. Something had changed. Not just the ground, but the air. The house. Himself, and for reasons he couldn't name, Isaiah James said nothing. Not that day. Not the next. He just kept staring out at the backyard, as if waiting for it to speak first. The next morning, the house seemed to hold its breath. Isaiah didn't sleep. Not really. He sat up most of the night, sipping water, occasionally pressing his palm against the cool window pane. The backyard stared back at him, still, silent, as if waiting for him to finish what he started. By mid-morning, the sun pressed down like judgment. He pulled on gloves and returned to the spot without a word, shovel in hand, heart heavy in his chest. There was no logic left, just pull. It's a kind that made men walk into fires or dig past warnings. The dirt gave easier today, loosened by yesterday's unease. He cleared the remaining soil around the box, revealing its full shape. A narrow rectangle, barely long enough for a child. The wood had almost dissolved in parts, eaten by time and moisture. Mold feathered the corners like rot blooming into veins. His fingers trembled as he wedged the tip of the shovel beneath one of the loose boards and pried gently. The wood gave with a groan like a sigh to long held. What lay inside stopped his breath. A burlap sack. Tattered, stained and sunken inward. It wrapped something small, curled in on itself, like it had once known pain. Isaiah knelt closer. He hesitated, then reached down and peeled back the top fold. Bones, delicate, brittle. A child's ribcage, collapsed inward, like a caged breath never released. A tiny skull rested sideways, jaw slightly parted, as if caught mid-cry, and around the left ankle, still clasped in place, was a rusted iron shackle. The chain had long since snapped, but the circle remained. Tight, brutal, final, Isaiah fell backward, breath ragged, dirt sticking to the sweat on his arms. His mind reeled, tried to unsee, tried to rewrite, but the truth sat plain in the ground. This wasn't just death. This was erasure. He crawled forward again, more careful now, gently pushing aside more of the burlap. The bones had been arranged, arms crossed, head tilted. No marker, no name, no sign that anyone had meant to remember. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes before he even knew they were coming. Not because he knew the child, but because he didn't. Because someone had buried a black child here silently, out, secretly. The world had gone on. How many people had walked over this earth? Built fences? Barbecued? Mowed lawns? How many times had his grandfather looked out over this patch and chosen not to speak? He thought of the warning again. Some things best left in the ground. But why? To protect who? The bones whispered. Stories Isaiah couldn't fully hear. Stories not in textbooks. Not in museums. Just here, buried behind a house in Virginia, wrapped in burlap, chained in silence. He stood, swaying slightly, and looked around. The world hadn't changed. The sky was still cloudless. The wind still moved the grass. Somewhere a lawnmower buzzed faintly, a reminder that life didn't pause for the dead. But Isaiah had changed. He thought of calling the police, but what would they do? Bag it up? Take it away? File a report? Would they care? Would anyone? His phone stayed in his pocket. Instead, he went into the garage and found an old blue tarp, the kind his grandfather had used to cover firewood in the winter. He returned and gently draped it over the grave, not to hide it, but to protect it, until he knew what came next. Then he sat beside it, legs crossed, head in his hands. Hours passed. Our shadows shifted. A crow landed on the fence, watched him with something like understanding. Isaiah didn't move. He knew the weight of racism in daily life. Microaggressions, coded words, cautious glances. But this was history's fingerprint pressed into. The dirt, this was a crime, and a memory, and a haunting, and still he told no one, not yet. The next morning, Isaiah woke to a sky smeared with gray. The tarp in the backyard flapped gently in the wind, like breath rising and falling beneath it. He couldn't look out the window for long. The weight of what lay below had shifted something. Inside him, a quiet, insistent throb he couldn't ignore. He needed answers. Not just about the bones, but about the land, silence around it, the shape of a truth buried deeper than any coffin. So he drove into town. The Fairhill Public Library sat across from the town square, white columns, green shutters, and a pristine flagpole rising like a needle into the sky. It had been freshly painted. Everything in Fairhill looked freshly painted, as if covering rot was tradition. Inside, the air was cool and dry. Dust floated like ash in the filtered light. A brass bell above the door gave a cheerful ding, too cheerful for Isaiah's mood. Behind the front desk sat an older woman, thin glasses, tight bun, floral blouse buttoned to the throat. She looked up from her desk as Isaiah approached, her gaze flicking to his skin before settling into a brittle smile. "Help you with something?" she asked, her voice papery and polite. "I'm looking for property records," Isaiah said. Historical. Maps. Something about land ownership. Maybe back to the 30s. The woman her name tag read. June hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "Most of our town archives are upstairs, though I'll warn you. Records before 1950 are ... incomplete." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Any particular reason?" June's smile thinned. "Fires, flooding, poor storage back then. Things happen." She turned away before he could respond, moving toward a set of drawers with stiff, clipped steps. He followed, keeping his expression neutral. He had learned long ago the subtle codes of white spaces like these, the pauses, the tight smiles, the words said and unsaid. June handed him a yellowed folder. Old maps. Might be something there. She walked off without offering further help. Isaiah sat at a long wooden table near a window and began to sift through the documents. Most were land deeds and plat drawings, acres marked off with tidy inked lines. Owned by names that repeated like a chant: Crawford Bellamy. Denton. He searched for his grandfather's plot. Finally, he found it parcel for 8B, a small square, labeled Negro Residence Son Registered. No date, no further notes. Unease twisted in his gut. Unregistered, unnamed, as if it hadn't mattered. As if his grandfather had existed only in the margins. He flipped to a brittle newspaper. Clipping from 1936. A headline caught his eye. Fairhill School for Colored Children destroyed in accidental fire. No photo, no follow dash up. His fingers trembled as he traced the date. The article was barely 4 paragraphs long. One line stood out. Authorities confirm one child unaccounted for, no name, no age, just gone. June returned as he was still reading. You finding what you need? She asked, voice tighter this time. Some, Isaiah said. He held up the clipping. You have anything more on this? The school fire? She pursed her lips. No, that's all we have on that. Tragic incident. Best not to dwell on it. Isaiah met her gaze. History doesn't go away just because it's uncomfortable. June's smile didn't return. No, but digging too deep into it doesn't always end well. Some things are better left in the past. He stared at her. Something old and brittle behind her eye sphere, maybe, or guilt masked as caution. Kind of look that said, You're not from here. Out. Don't stir the still water. Isaiah rose without another word, tucking the clipping into his notebook. As he stepped out into the muggy afternoon, the town square looked different. Same buildings. Same flags. But now everything pulsed with questions. He heard it again, his grandfather's voice, low and raspy, on a summer night years ago. Don't dig too deep, son. This town forgets with a purpose. But Isaiah had already dug. And what he was uncovering didn't want to stay silent. The clipping rattled in Isaiah's hand as he stepped out of the library. The humidity pressed down like wet cotton, but his fingers stayed cold. He crossed the street in slow strides, not watching traffic, barely seeing the square. His mind was fixed on the year 1936 in ashes and silence. Back at the house, he spread the clipping on the kitchen table, smoothing it with his palm. The newsprint had yellowed into parchment, the ink faded but legible. The headline screamed like a slap. Negro School, Fire No Survivors. Below it for short paragraphs. Official cause? Faulty coal heater. The fire started before dawn, consuming the single-room structure in less than an hour. No names listed, no photos, just the word tragedy. Tragedy without faces. Isaiah's eyes dropped to the last line of the article. It's barely more than a footnote. Authorities also confirmed the disappearance of one child, 6-year-old male. Last seen the evening prior. Identity unverified. That was it. 3 lines. Boy missing before the fire. No mention of a search. No appeal to the public. Just gone. Isaiah leaned back, hands gripping the edge of the table. The house around him groaned with age. The floorboards whispering under the weight of memory. What if that child, the one who vanished, was the one buried in his backyard? He closed his eyes, letting the image return. The small ribcage curled like a question. The iron shackle biting. Into bone? That wasn't the result of an accident. That was containment, control, cruelty. Who was that boy, and who had wanted him forgotten? He stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The tarp in the backyard shimmered under the sun like a wound that refused to scab. He hadn't uncovered the rest of the grave yet. Part of him feared what else might lie there. But the fear was changing, morphing into something heavier. Resolve. He went to his grandfather's bookshelf and pulled. Down an old leather-bound journal, dates. Scrawled on the spine, though most pages were blank, Isaiah thumbed through it until he found what he was looking for, a faded envelope wedged between the pages. Inside were photographs, black and white, sun-faded. One showed the old Fairhill-colored school, a small wooden structure with boarded windows and a bell tower leaning like it had lost its will to stand. Children stood out front, some smiling, some stone-faced, none labeled, no names. It's just faces frozen in time. Isaiah scanned each one, searching for something, anything. But how do you recognize someone whose name you don't know, whose life ended before it truly began? He found a second clipping folded. Into the envelope, more degraded than the first. No headline, just an obituary section. A list of names. Most were elderly. One entry stood out simply because it didn't belong. Ellison, infant male, unrecorded date of death. No known family. No burial records submitted, Ellison. The name caught in his throat. Isaiah placed the photo, the clippings in the envelope on the table beside the journal. Then he sat down, fingers steepled against his lips. He felt the shape of something vast. Now bigger than one grave, bigger than one boy, history actively erased, piece by deliberate piece. And still, no one had come knocking. No sheriff, no neighbors. Nothing to indicate that anyone missed what he had found, because they hadn't. They had forgotten. Him on purpose. Isaiah reached for his notebook and wrote one word at the top of a blank page. Ellison. He underlined it twice. He didn't know where. This road would lead, but he knew now he couldn't turn back. Isaiah sat in his truck for a long time before walking into the sheriff's office. The building squatted at the edge of Fairhills downtown, next to the fire station, with a whitewashed front and a freshly planted American flag flapping above. The steps. It was clean, orderly, and still like everything else in this town, just a little too polished. He took the steps slowly. The bones were still under the tarp. The photo of the school, the clippings, the name Ellison all burned, fresh in his mind. He wasn't sure what he expected, but part of him hoped there'd be protocol, decency, something resembling justice. The front desk was unmanned. A bell sat on the counter. Isaiah tapped it twice. Footsteps echoed from the back. Then a man emerged. Mid-50s, sunburnt neck, crisp tan uniform. The badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. Sheriff G. Denton. Well now, the sheriff said, smiling broadly. You must be Isaiah James. Heard you were back in town, fixing up the old place. Isaiah forced a polite nod. I need to report something. Denton gestured toward his office. Let's talk inside. The sheriff's office was decorated with deer antlers. Black and white photos of Fairhill through the decades, and a shelf lined with dusty yearbooks. Denton eased into his leather chair, motioned to the one across from him. So, he said, folding his hands, what's on your mind? Isaiah leaned forward. I found a grave in my backyard. Denton didn't blink. A grave, unmarked, child-sized coffin, iron shackle on the ankle. A pause. Then the sheriff chuckled, low and easy. Well, shoot. Probably an old settler grave. A lot of history around here, you'd be surprised. Folks used to bury kin right on their property. No fuss. Isaiah's stare held steady. With shackles, Denton raised an eyebrow, the smile still playing on his lips, but no longer reaching his eyes. Rust can look like all sorts of things, son. You'd be amazed what time and weather can do to the imagination. Wasn't my imagination, Isaiah. Said there's a body, a child. No marker, no record. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. I appreciate you coming in, I do. But let's not stir up ghosts, all right? There's a process for these things. We'll make a note, maybe check the property records, see if anything official turns up. Sound good? Isaiah said nothing. People here don't take kindly to having their town's name dragged through the mud? Denton continued, voice still syrupy, but thicker now. Especially not over something nobody alive remembers. Isaiah met his gaze. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. A beat passed. The sheriff's smile didn't move, but the temperature in the room dropped. Look, Denton said, standing. Slowly, I'll file a report. But unless there's criminal evidence, no sense in calling in the state or making a big mess out of a 100-year-old grave. You understand? Isaiah stood too. I understand exactly. He turned without shaking hands. As he reached the door, Denton added, You know, your granddaddy kept to himself. Good man. Never caused trouble. Respected the way things were. Isaiah paused, hand on the doorknob. That might have been his way. It's not mine. He left. Without another word, back in the truck, Isaiah sat gripping the wheel, his reflection staring back in the rearview mirror. He hadn't expected much from the sheriff. But the ease with which Denton dismissed the bones chilled him, not denial, something worse. Familiarity. The kind that came from knowing more than he'd said. Behind the charm, behind the polite smile, was something else. Fear and maybe guilt. Isaiah didn't drive home. Instead, he turned east toward Baltimore. Toward Aunt Leila, someone who knew the full story. Isaiah drove through the night. The highway stretched out like a dark ribbon, moonlight flashing across faded white lines. His thoughts spun in tight, hot circles. Denton's smile, the bones, the child's name not spoken. Every mile took him farther from Fairhill's varnished silence and closer to the only person who might tell him what no one else would. He arrived in Baltimore just after 2 a.m. The streets here were louder, messier, alive, in a way Fairhill never was. Aunt Leila's porch light was on, same as always. He parked and climbed the stairs, tension buzzing in his shoulders. Didn't call ahead, didn't have to. She opened the door before he knocked. I knew that phone call meant more than. You said, she muttered, stepping aside. Come on in. Ollie was in her 60s, hair wrapped in a scarf, eyes sharp as ever. She moved slow but deliberate, like a woman who had survived too much to waste time. Her small apartment smelled of sage and strong tea. Isaiah sank into the old floral couch, the same one he used to nap on as a boy. She sat across from him, watching. What did you find? She asked. Isaiah didn't answer right away. He opened his notebook instead, slid the photo of the school, and the clipping about the fire across the table. She looked at them and closed her eyes. A long breath escaped her. I was afraid of this. You knew? He asked quietly. She nodded, slow. Your granddaddy never said it outright, but he carried it. In his walk, in his silence, that land. It held more than tomatoes and tobacco. He always told me, don't let the boy dig back there. I thought he was just being his usual tight-lipped self. Isaiah leaned forward. But why wouldn't he tell me? Lila met his eyes. Because he grew up there. He knew what that town did when you spoke out. Men disappeared for less. He stayed quiet to survive. Shouldn't have had to. No, but that was his world. She tapped the clipping. Yours is different. You've got a voice. You've got ways of making people listen. Isaiah ran a hand over his face. There's a child buried back there. No name, shackled, and the sheriff won't do a thing. Lila's lips pressed into a hard line. Of course not. That man's daddy wore a badge too. This isn't new. Fairhill's always been a place where history gets ... rearranged. But don't think for a second they don't remember. Your granddaddy knew there were bones in that dirt. She reached across and took his hand. So do they. You're waking something they worked hard to forget. Isaiah's chest tightened. Not from fear, but clarity. A deep, cold truth settled in his bones. They had all been taught to survive by being silent. But maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. He nodded once, slow. I'm not burying this, he said. Lila gave him a tired smile. Then you better get ready. They'll come for your piece. Maybe more. Outside the city hummed, uncaring. Inside, a fire began to kindle low, slow, and steady. Isaiah didn't know exactly what came next, but he knew where he was headed. Isaiah returned to Fairhill the next afternoon, the Baltimore skyline shrinking behind him as rural silence crept back in. He felt it before he saw Iton edge in the air, like a note held too long. As he pulled into the driveway, the hairs on his arms stood straight. Something was wrong. He stepped out of the truck slowly. The house sat still, quiet as ever. but the smell hit him before his eyes caught up char, smoke, and gasoline. His boots crunched over blackened grass. Then he saw it. A wooden cross. 6 feet tall, stood skewed in the middle of his front yard, burnt. The ends still smoldered faintly. Ash had spilled onto the porch, leaving dark streaks on the white railing. The message was as old as it was clear. Leave it buried. Isaiah stood motionless. Wind stirred the ashes at his feet. His eyes burned, not from the smoke but from the clarity that came with it. This was no misunderstanding, no coincidence. Someone knew what he had found. They wanted him scared. But instead of fear, something colder rose in him, something sharp. They hadn't just threatened him. They had made it public. Loud. Visible, he walked past the burned cross, unlocked his front door, and went straight to the kitchen table. The photos were still there. The grave, the burlap, the child's skull, the rusted shackle. He stared at them a long time before taking out his phone. He snapped each image carefully. Then he stood, walked out back, and peeled back the tarp one last time. The grave yawned open in the sunlight. The child still curled in silence. Click, click. He didn't flinch. Later that night, Isaiah sat in front of his grandfather's old desktop computer, the monitor flickering with each keystroke. Didn't bother using his name. He didn't call the news. He created a blog. Simple, stark, black and white. Title, The Unmarked Child. Subtitle, One Grave, One Town, One Truth. He uploaded the photos, wrote a short entry. This child was buried in silence. No name, no grave marker. Just a chain around his ankle and a history. Too many want forgotten. I found him in my backyard. Bear Hill, Virginia. 2024. Someone left a burning cross on my porch today. I'm not going anywhere. He hit publish. The post went live at 11:42 p.m. By midnight, it had 50 views. By morning, it would have thousands. But that night, Isaiah sat in the dark, the only light coming from the glow of the screen, his heart. Be steady. He felt no triumph, only weight. He didn't sleep. Just after 3 a.m., a truck drove slowly down the street, lights off. A figure in the passenger seat stared up at the house, then turned away. Isaiah didn't move from the window. He let them see him. They wanted him silent. Instead, he had handed them a mirror. Morning came gray and low. Ash still clung to the porch. The smell of smoke lingered in the walls. Isaiah brewed coffee, pulled his hoodie tight, and stepped onto the front steps. Neighbors peeked from windows. No one said a word, but eyes couldn't unsee. By noon, the first comment appeared on the blog. I think my grandfather told stories about a kid who went missing around that time. I'm going to check the attic. An hour later, another. This happened in more towns than you think. Isaiah read each one slowly, hands shaking not with fear, but with recognition. This wasn't just his story anymore. As he refreshed the blog, a message arrived from a name he didn't know. I'm a journalist. I want to help you tell this right. Please reply. Isaiah looked out at the yard. The cross was gone now. He'd burned what was left, but the ground had changed. So had he. He closed the message, then reopened it. Isaiah responded to the message. The next morning, the journalist's name was Leah Granger. 29, freelance, based in Richmond. Her writing focused on racial justice, forgotten histories, and truth that made people uncomfortable. Isaiah liked that last part. They agreed to meet at the Fairhill Town Square, neutral ground. She arrived wearing jeans, boots, and a green utility jacket, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose bun. She carried a leather-bound notebook and eyes that didn't flinch. Isaiah watched her approach from the bench. Outside the shuttered post office. Mr. James, she asked. He nodded. Isaiah. She sat beside him. Not too close, not too far. I read your blog, she said. All of it. I've covered sites like this before and marked black cemeteries, schools that accidentally caught fire. This one, ... This one feels different. Should. Isaiah replied. They left a burning cross on my porch. Leah didn't blink. Then it's working. You've made them afraid. They talked for over an hour. He showed her the photos, the clippings, the envelope from his grandfather's journal. She listened, never interrupting, her pen scratching only when the silence allowed. He didn't mean to trust her, but the words came anyway. Finally, she said, "There's a church not far from here, St. Adeline's, one of the oldest in the county. Some churches kept records even when counties didn't." "Worth a shot," Isaiah said. They drove there together. The chapel stood faded and sun-cracked, the wooden cross above its door warped by time. An elderly black caretaker named Mr. Leon let them inside. When Isaiah explained what they were looking for, Leon didn't ask questions, just pointed to the basement stairs. "Archives are down there. Ain't been touched in years." The air below was thick with mildew and dust. Shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten stories. Leah combed through baptism logs and handwritten registers, while Isaiah flipped through funeral books. Yellowed pages crumbling at the corners. Then Leah froze. "I think I have something." Isaiah crossed to her. She held open a ledger from 1936. Name: Samuel Ellison. Age: approx. 6. Date of burial: unknown. Cause of death: unspecified. Parents: not listed. Burial site: Private 48B. Isaiah stared at the entry, his breath shallow. 48B, he whispered. "That's my grandfather's land." It hit him like a wave, a name, a boy, a place. He wasn't just a child, it was Samuel. That simple truth cracked something open. Leah gently placed a hand on the page. "We need to get this scanned, documented, public." Isaiah nodded, his voice thick. "Let's tell the story." They left the church just before sundown, and Leah went straight to work. By midnight, her article was live. Headline: Who was Samuel Ellison? One man's backyard holds a forgotten child, and a town's silent history. Within hours, it spread. Social media picked it up. A local station ran a segment. By sunrise, thousands had read it. People began reaching out: old neighbors, former students, distant relatives who remembered hearing whispers. And more reporters, more eyes. But Isaiah didn't care about virality. He stood in his backyard at dawn, staring at the tarp as the light warmed the grass. For the first time, he whispered the name aloud: Samuel. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and low. He wasn't forgotten anymore. The next morning, Isaiah opened his inbox and found more than 500 new messages. Some were from journalists, others from academics, museum curators, genealogy researchers, but many were from people like him, black families across the South who'd grown up hearing half-spoken stories. Stories of lost cousins, missing names, schoolhouse fires, graves behind barns. He scrolled in silence, but not all the messages were kind. By afternoon, the threats began. "Go back to Baltimore. Stop digging up lies. We'll make sure you stay buried next time." The comments flooded his blog. Photos of nooses. A doctored image of his burned porch with the words "should have stayed quiet." That night, someone threw a rock through his window. The glass shattered across the kitchen floor like ice. He ducked instinctively, heart pounding, then peered out through the curtains. No one, but in the street. Just visible in the beam of the porch light was a long scratch across his truck door. A single word. "Traitor," he called the police. No one answered. He left a message. No one came. Instead, people began showing up. First one, then another. An older woman arrived the next morning, standing on his porch with a cane in one hand and a worn Bible in the other. She introduced herself as Mrs. Lucille Grant. "My brother disappeared when I was 8, she said, voice trembling. "He went to that school. He told us it burned down with everyone inside, but ... we never found him. His name wasn't in. No paper. My mama died wondering. It could have been him. That child. Samuel." Isaiah helped her into a chair. Right. Not loud, but deep, the kind of grief that had waited decades to be seen. Later that day, another visitor. A man in his 70s, former custodian at Fairhill Middle. He brought a photo of a wooden bell tower, now gone. It used to be part of the old school, he said, before they paved over it and put in the new gym. More came. A single mother who'd heard whispers from her great aunt. A teacher who kept a stack of anonymous letters from students, describing bad things near the woods. Each person arrived with shards of a truth too long ignored. Isaiah wrote down everything, kept the kettle warm and the door unlocked. Something was happening, and he knew it wasn't just about Samuel anymore that night. It happened. The break-in. Isaiah had just finished uploading a second blog entry, photos of the ledger with Samuel's name. Testimony from Mrs. Grant when the power cut out. The house went black. He reached for his phone, flashlight on. Footsteps creaked from the back porch. The window above the sink shattered. He grabbed the fire poker. A figure climbed halfway through the window before locking eyes with him both, frozen for a breathless second in the beam of Isaiah's flashlight. Then, the intruder pulled back, disappearing into the night. The tire screeched. Silence returned. Isaiah stood shaking in the center of the kitchen. He didn't sleep. Just sat in the living room, staring at the shadows, waiting for something worse, but it didn't come. Instead, in the morning, the doorbell rang. This time, it was a group. 4 black families from the neighborhood. People Isaiah had passed in town but never spoken to. They stood on his porch with casseroles and envelopes. One woman gripping a scrapbook in her arms. "We've been quiet too long," she said. "It's time." Isaiah stepped back and let them in. They gathered around the table, sharing names, dates, fragments. Someone brought out a faded funeral program with Ellison in the corner. Someone else remembered a Sunday school teacher who vanished after the fire. The silence cracked wider with every story, and still the blog grew by nightfall. A university professor had offered to carbon date the bones. A civil rights attorney sent a message: "You're not alone. We're watching now." Now the ground that once held a secret now held a movement. Isaiah looked out at the yard, where the tarp still rested over Samuel's grave. This time, it didn't feel like a burial. It felt like a door. The hum of generators filled the morning air. Bright orange barricades framed Isaiah's backyard, now transformed into an official excavation site. Men and women in khaki vests and hard hats moved with quiet precision. Cameras, clipboards, flags, marking disturbed soil. Isaiah stood on the porch, arms folded across his chest, watching history rise from the ground like breath long held. They'd come from the state archaeology office after Leah's second article ran. Bolstered by mounting public pressure and the growing mountain of testimonies, within 48 hours of their arrival, they found more. 5 additional graves, all unmarked, all small, all buried beneath decades of silence. When the second child's remains were uncovered, bones curled and wrapped in cloth, the shape of a spine, not yet grown, one of the diggers wept, quietly off to the side, trying not to let it show. The town could no longer look away. By the end of the week, the governor's office issued a statement. A task force was created. The press descended. CNN, NPR, even the New York Times. Headlines now carried names Isaiah never thought would be spoken outside. Fairhill. And then Sheriff Denton resigned. No press conference. No apology. Just a single letter released through a county clerk's office citing health reasons. Everyone knew. The truth had finally cracked the foundation he stood on. Isaiah didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, but he also felt something else. Light. The town hall meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Folding chairs filled the old school auditorium, the same one Denton had spoken in 100 times before. This time, Isaiah stood behind the podium. The room was packed. Residents lined the walls, some in Sunday clothes, others in work boots and jeans. The front row was filled with faces he now knew by name: Mrs. Grant, the scrapbook woman. Leah sat near the center, notebook in her lap. Porters lined the back wall. Isaiah adjusted the microphone. The hum of feedback briefly echoed, then silence. He looked out across the crowd, heart pounding. A year ago, Himido stayed quiet. Might have dug the hole, covered it back up. Gone home? Not now. He cleared his throat. My name is Isaiah James. I live on the old James property parcel for 8B. A few weeks ago, I found the body of a child in my backyard. He was buried with no name, no record, and a shackle around his ankle. Murmurs rose, then fell. That child's name was Samuel Ellison. He let the name hang in the air, heavy as thunder. They didn't mark his grave. They didn't write. His story, they tried to erase him, and others. But we're here now. We remember. He paused, scanning the room. This isn't just about bones. It's about the lies this town told to survive. About the silence we were all asked to accept. Well, I won't. And I know I'm not alone anymore. A few nods, then applause. Slow, deliberate building. I don't want revenge. I want truth. I want every child buried in that soil named and honored. I want a memorial. I want records unsealed. I want every person who still lives here to ask, what did we inherit on? What will we leave behind? The applause grew louder, rising into something not just approving but resolute. A voice called out from the back, say his name again. Isaiah didn't hesitate. Samuel Ellison. The room echoed it back. Samuel Ellison. Tears burned. At the edges of his eyes, it's not just grief, but release. Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the press packed up, Isaiah stood alone beneath the fluorescent lights. Leah approached, handing him a printed copy of the article going to print. The next day, headline, From the Dirt, a voice one man's fight to unearth justice in Fair Hill. He smiled faintly. It's not just my fight anymore. No, she said, tucking her notebook under her arm. But you gave it a voice. He looked out the window at the soft glow of his street. The excavation site fenced off, but visible in the moonlight. Justice wasn't loud, it was steady, and the ground was finally speaking. Autumn arrived quietly in Fair Hill. The leaves turned slow, as if the trees themselves were pausing to take in the shift. Isaiah stood in the backyard beneath a sky smeared with gray and gold. A soft breeze stirred the grass where the excavation had ended, now seated and clean. Where a child had once been buried in silence, there now stood a stone, smooth, unadorned, honest. The memorial was simple by design. Isaiah didn't want it to be grand. He wanted it to be real. A modest pedestal of dark granite set into the earth, facing east, so the morning sun would hit it first. Samuel Ellison 19301936. You were never lost. We see you now, Isaiah reached out and laid his hand on the cool surface. He felt the texture of the letters beneath his fingertips. He had touched many things since coming home. Earth, bone, fear. But this was the first thing that felt ... finished. Not forgotten. Not erased. Held a few feet away, folding chairs had been set up for the small ceremony. Dozens of people had come. Black families from across the county, teachers, journalists, children, holding hands with elders who whispered names they hadn't spoken in decades. Even some of the white townsfolk stood at the back. It's quiet, uncertain, watching. A local pastor had offered a prayer. Mrs. Grant had read a poem written by her late mother. Isaiah didn't give a speech this time. He just stood still and let the moment breathe. Now, the crowd had thinned. The chairs mostly empty. But Isaiah remained. Leah approached, camera in hand, not snapping photos, just holding it gently at her side. He was 6, she said softly. My nephew just turned 6 last week? Isaiah nodded. Should have had a whole life. And now, she said, voice catching, he'll never be invisible again. They stood together in silence. In the quiet, Isaiah could hear birds. Overhead, the low rustle of leaves, the hum of wind moving through something no longer sealed. He stepped back and looked over the field. 5 more markers had been added, smaller stones with temporary plaques. The state had confirmed their identities. Still pending, but each now had a place, a voice. Isaiah turned toward the house. It had been repainted. The shattered window replaced, the porch rebuilt, but he hadn't changed the squeaky screen door. Some things needed to keep their voice. Inside, the walls were no longer bare. Framed newspaper clippings lined the hallway headlines telling, "A story the town once tried to bury. Who was Samuel Ellison? The unmarked child in the reckoning of Fairhill. Sheriff resigns. A town remembers." Isaiah moved slowly through the living room, pausing at the shelf that now held his grandfather's old journal, the photo of the school children, and the weathered envelope that started everything. He placed a small bouquet of dried wildflowers beside it. He didn't feel triumphant, felt awake. Later that night, he sat on the back porch, coffee cooling in his hands, the sky smeared with stars. The memorial stone caught the moonlight, a soft glint in the distance. A single candle burned beside it, left by someone who hadn't spoken during the service. Isaiah didn't need to know who, he only needed to know someone had come. The wind. Picked up again, cool and clean. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on the stone. "Samuel," he whispered, "we see you now." The breeze shifted as if exhaling in. For a brief second, Isaiah could almost hear a child's laughter carried on. The wind, not eerie, not haunting free. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, let the silence settle without fear. It wasn't empty now. It was full of memory, of voices, of truth. The grave was no longer forgotten, and Isaiah James was no longer silent.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.